computer. I will just start again because we're recording in progress now. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our fourth panel. The title for today is Futures of the Belt and Road Initiative. The following paper is going to be presented by Salam Alshareef. His paper's title is The Belt and Road in the Middle East, Beyond the Territorial and Capitalist Logics of Power. And the next paper will be presented by Josef Baum. And his paper is, will the new Silk Road be grey or green? So I will pass it over to Salam now.
So good morning, everybody. And sorry, apologize for being late. The title of my intervention has changed since I submitted the proposition. It is now Capitalist and Territorial Logics of Power of a Contender State, the case of Belt and Road in the Middle East. I will start by research questions, and I will present the theoretical framework, central cases, and
just study. 1 second, because we need to share the screen with people online. So we need to just choose share screen.
And I will finish by presenting the empirical result of my work in 3 domains of the Belt and Road Initiative in the Middle East. It's energy security, safe and expedited trade route, and thirdly, the decline of petrodollar and rise petrol ban. This study is an attempt to provide empirical and theoretical contribution to the debate about the drivers, political and economic drivers of Belt and Road Initiative, understood as a unity operating through different geographical scale. Is a Belt and Road Initiative is motivated by political or economic drivers? Are these drivers located internal or external to China? I apply this question to China's relation with the Middle East in 3 domains I said: energy security, trade route, and all related monetary and financial arrangements between petrol ban. Should be noted that the dominant views about Belt and Road Initiative either focus on geopolitical factors pushing China to initiate this initiative, or economic factors. At geopolitical level, we have a dominant narrative that recuperate historically anti-imperialist narrative at the level of economic drivers. It's normally seen as an initiative based on a spatial fix in the sense that there is a crisis of offer accumulation of capital, which is being fixed through exporting capital abroad through different forms, trade, investment, finance, etc. A few studies attempt to account for political and economic factors understood as a unity, because nowadays academia, it's difficult to think politics and economics as a unity with the attacks that have been addressed to Marxism. So there are few studies who attempt to do that, to study political economic factors operating as a unity in different, on all geographical scales, mean global, regional, and national. But with endemic methodology shortcoming, especially, for example, if we take the key concepts that I base my analytical framework on, which are territorial and capitalist logic of power, developed by David Harvey, 2003, they were developed in the context of studying US imperialist capitalism, as Harvey called it, in the context of war on Iraq 2003. But they are applied on China in an extravagant manner, in the sense that China is neither the USA, doesn't have the same position in global capitalism, and whether it is imperialism or not, at least it's debated. And knowing that analytical concepts are highly sensitive to their object of study, we engage with these 2 concepts of territorial and capitalist logic of power. We engage critically. I will start by defining what is capitalist logic of power, what is territorial logic of power. Capitalist logic of power is a molecular process of capital accumulation in space and time, where command over the use of capital takes primacy. Economic power flows through the daily practice of production, trade, commerce, capital flows. The capitalist logic is explained by Harvey by another notion, which is a special fix. Simply put, over-accumulation of capital in certain territory is being solved by exporting capital under different form elsewhere. Territorial logic of power refer to the political, diplomatic, and military strategies invoked and used by a state to assert its interest and achieve its goals in the world at large. In general, capitalist logic mean economic factors, territorial logic mean political, geopolitical factors. What we argue is that identifying interscalar determinants of Belt and Road Initiative require situating China within the dynamic of capitalist totality. We do that with the help of the concept of uneven development, which was developed by Lenin in his famous book, Imperialism, Highest Stage of Capitalism, because this concept permits theoretically to integrate an integration of external and internal determinant of Belt and Road and how they are articulated at different scale. Specifically, it allows to understand how Belt and Road is conditioned by the Chinese state peculiar mood of mediation of capital accumulation process, the political economy of China, and how it manages capital accumulation. Secondly, it permits to understand and integrate how BRI is conditioned by geopolitical pressures, and more generally, the presence of contradictory existence of mutually entangled social formations, and how they shape geopolitical rivalries and external and political factor and necessity imposing themselves on policymakers of the Belt and Road Initiative. Within this logic, some authors, especially Van der Bichel and Radhika Desai, argue that within the dynamic of uneven development, some states opt for a strategy of development called contender state, which might take a communist form or capitalist form. Communist form, URSS, China, maybe. Capitalist form, Japan and Germany. The objective of this strategy is to change the position of state in question within the hierarchy of international division of labor. China is a contender state which is deeply integrated in global economy, where state class retain the key levels of political and economic power and operate as a force anticipating and guiding class formation, with the objective of developing productive forces and upgrade its industrial and technological basis. Indeed, the study that I do on China shows that the Belt and Road Initiative contain an embedded state function that some author says that it amounts to a geo-industrial policy outside China. We see that we find that different levels of Chinese state are involved in Belt and Road projects, from the design to implementation, passing by financing sources and mechanism, where a panel of state and non-state actors are deployed and which are interacting in both bottom-up and top-down ways, ranging from ministries, central bank, policy banks, specialized funds, China-led multilateral banks, state-owned enterprises, private enterprises, industrial associations, provincial states. Still, capitalist logic can operate through and dominate state apparatus. If state-owned enterprises are the main investor of Belt and Road Initiative, it doesn't mechanically mean that it is Peking, the center of Peking, is really controlling what's happening, especially in a context of overseas investment. Ownership simply may be nominal, but the presence of such a paradox is structurally present in China's model, as presented by our colleague Cheng yesterday. The mode of accumulation of China has a structural paradox, two modes of accumulation. The presence of such a paradox calls for investigating the balance of power between different classes and studying the organizational forms that permit or not an influence over the operation of overseas capital, instead of ex-ante reduction of Belt and Road Initiative to a special fix like David Harvey does. So the question, what are the criteria that the embedded state function is not nominal? In our study, we have two interrelated, two combined criteria that should be evaluated in case by case. The first is ownership and the type of actors involved in the activities. It counts. Second, simply the policy outcome for the activities that we are studying. For example, does Chinese investment in oil sector in Middle East are contributing to ensuring energy security or not? Second implication for China's contender state. As a contender state that is deeply integrated in the global economy, China is dependent on global production, exchange, and connectivity networks, which are mainly dominated by the USA at two levels. The first, the political economic nature of rules organizing international economic relations, especially international monetary system, intellectual property rights, which this nature of international political economy input Chinese attempts to change its position in the International Division of Labor. The second level that it is dependent on US is the direct military control and infrastructural control, for example, on trade routes. The United States is present militarily across all trade routes that connect different parts of Eurasia. It controls international payment system. It can disconnect disobedient state from executing transactions. So this reality puts double pressure on China to change the rules of global institution in order to enlarge its development policy space, in order to be capable to pursue its industrial policy in home, which attain a new level. Now we should innovate in China, much more complicated than simply assembling and producing simple products in China. And second, to protect vital links that China's economy have with the world economy, from US increasing use of its geopolitical and geoeconomic power to disrupt connectivity of China and other disobedient states from world economy. This paradox is very clear in Chinese relation with the Middle East. China's central position in the international monetary system is anchored in the petrodollar arrangement in the Middle East. And Chinese dependency on energy sourced from the Middle East and its momentous stake for economic flows passing through the region exposes its fragilities to US military presence in the region. So central thesis formulated in relation to territorial logic of power, capitalist and territorial logics of power. First, accounting for China's position in the capitalist totality permit to argue that two logics of power unfold in a variety of forms and deliver structurally different outcomes. First, while the United States special fix left whole areas in the United States impoverished and disindustrialized, the Belt and Road Initiative integrate and attempt to address uneven development within China as it positions marginalized provinces as central nodes in Belt and Road transnational circuit of capital. Second, while the United States special fix constituted private capital and was accompanied by a new liberal political economic offensive at all scales, the BRI is mainly a state-owned or directed transnational capital, accompanied by a revision of international new liberal institutions in a manner that permit less liberal policy to be applied at the world level. While the United States territorial logic of power relies on military, security, political, and economic intervention, while mobilizing a balancing approach between elementing contradiction between, for example, Iran and Saudi Arabia, the Belt and Road Initiative as a territorial policy comprises cooperative arrangement that seeks to alter the conditions of production, distribution, and circulation of resources toward a more secure and fair organization than the current situation. Current situation is marked by the political economic nature of the US-led international new liberal order and US imperialist political practice. So let's go to empirical work. The first domain that I study is Belt and Road and China's energy security. It should be highlighted that energy security is simply vital for economic growth. China's oil imports dependency has increased from 50% in 2009 to 73% in 2019. It means oil, 73% of oil come from outside China. 45% of Chinese oil was sourced from the Middle East in 2020. What is the main strategy for China to ensure its energy security? It's through acquiring overseas oil assets and equity oil, signing stable supply agreement, and state diplomacy. The main instrument are Chinese state-owned oil companies that constitute strategic assets of statist globalization of a contender state. State control as well as energy security remains the overarching goals organizing national oil companies' activities. Managed marketization and decentralization in the image of hybrid Chinese development model. This marketization in some period functioned as a tool to reorganize the sector's activity and improve its productivity. Meanwhile, in a demonstration of how capitalist logic can operate through state apparatus, but also how it can be contained through political will and organization, the anti-corruption campaign launched by Xi Jinping have attained to the patron of Chinese oil sector and ex-permanent member of political bureau, Zhu Yongkang, and member of his family for corruption practice, including for investment in Iraq. At the level of policy outcome in the Middle East in respect to energy security, indeed half of oil produced overseas make its way back to China, and most of crude oil extracted from Sudan and Iraq go directly to China rather than to international markets. Iraq is the largest single country source of all China's overseas oil and gas production with 22%, while Egypt is the sixth largest supplier with 5%. Should be highlighted that Chinese companies have only been active in Iraq oil sector since 2008. But by the end 2013, 26 of Chinese overseas oil production was located in Iraq. Here, a table of Chinese investment of key oil gisements between 2008 and 2014. The second domain, which is a new trade route and the Belt and Road Initiative in the Middle East. Middle East is central trade route for China. For traditional trade route, it means a route that connects east of Asia with Europe. Europe is a central market for China. If the United States, in an escalation of confrontation with China, want to stop the flow of economy, China will suffer really at the level of its economy. And three announced components of Belt and Road Initiative are linked to Middle East, Maritime Silk and Road, China Central Asia, West Asia Economic Corridor, and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Chinese state-owned enterprises are the main actors in the development and operation of railways, airports, ports, industrial parks, and logistics center in the Middle East. Should be highlighted that the main regional connectors, mean Turkey, the Gulf region, Iran, Egypt, are highly enthusiastic and are putting program to create synergies with Belt and Road Initiative. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, which are allies with the United States, as everybody knows, are the second, third most important destination for Chinese construction contract. Turkey is the second most important destination for Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank. Here a list of some of Chinese investment in connectivity infrastructure in the Middle East. I can't give detail about all of these. We will take only one example, which is Oman Beacon project, which is an emblematic of how Chinese states institutions are coordinating spatial fix in a strategic manner to address a combined set of internal, external, and political and economic necessities. The project is mainly financed by Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in order to build the Beacon Port and the Gulf Railway, and it is intended to expedite the flow of energy from other Gulf producers and possibly from the wider Middle East. It means that in synergy with other Belt and Road Initiative projects in the Indian Ocean, especially China, Pakistan, and China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, DOCOM could contribute to bypassing the US military-dominated domination of the Indian Ocean and have the potential to transform the strategic nature of Indian Ocean, which is an enclosed, geographically an enclosed area, and this was 2 minutes, okay. And this was the basis of maritime power domination. Can I take external 2 minutes, additional 2 minutes? Okay. Okay. So as a part of China's effort to second issue in respect to how China is articulating its special fix in the domain of infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure, as a part of China's efforts to address its uneven internal development, as a condition of continued territorial integrity in China, it is positioning the marginalized Chinese regions as central nodes mediating and benefiting from transnational capital flows of the BRI. In fact, the majority of projects that I studied in this paper were financed or connecting Chinese marginalized regions, which are aimed by Chinese national program to address uneven development internally. Finally, I will try to go rapidly at this level. Securing access to trade is not simply an issue of securing physical access, it's also securing monetary and financial arrangement related to oil, given that United States, its currency and dominating oil transaction, and it dominates international payment system infrastructure. So Chinese revision of oil-related monetary and financial arrangements in its relation with the with Middle East show how trade and investment relation with the region, with the Belt and Road built on and deepen, could be geo-economically leveraged not only to increase energy security, but also to change the international monetary system. It means global governance. China already released Petro Yuan contract, which was relatively successful. It gained 50% of global activity of similar feature, a determinant of West Texas and Brent contracts. I will not go in details about the relation between renminbi internationalization and this approach, but simply to say that it is a part of a Chinese endeavor to gain monetary autonomy over its three economic activities. It is not the first commodity contract, it is the fifth commodity contract that China released. Most importantly, I will go rapidly on this issue, that Chinese relation with the Middle East provide a potential geo-economic leverage to increase oil invoicing in Yuan because the material structure of relation between China and Gulf region and oil producer especially permits that. First, China became the first source of imports for the major oil producer in the region, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, and the second largest source of imports in the case of Iraq, United Arab Emirates. So regional oil exporters have at least the interest to invoice oil renminbi to cover their trade relation with their first partner, China, and Chinese construction contract. China was 2016 the first investor in the region. It permits to reduce exchange risk. It permits to adopt an exchange regime more aligned with the fundamentals of oil producer. Most importantly is that renminbi use is in the rise in the region in a spectacular manner. At the trade level, 2015, 60% of all payments by value made by Qatar to China was made in renminbi, 60%, Qatar. United Arab Emirates, 80%. At monetary level, currency swap agreements was signed with Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Egypt. Two yuan clearing centers were established in Qatar, United Arab Emirates. So do allies of United States, what's happening? The region attested the biggest regional increase in number of regional financial institutions using yuan. It went from 61 financial institutions to 173 institutions in 6 years. United States is participating in the development of an alternative payment system based on multi-arrangement and digital currencies with Indonesia and Hong Kong. Financial levels, Gulf producers especially, are among the most active international actors in pipelines construed by China to permit enter of investor in renminbi to mainland, mainly the qualified foreign investor China. We'll go rapidly. United Arab Emirates and Qatar are the most active foreign issuer of renminbi-denominated bonds in London and in Luxembourg. Geopolitical consequence, any increase in invoicing oil in renminbi would reduce dependence of China on the increasingly weaponized US dollar and on US dominated financial and monetary infrastructure. And it goes without saying that it would be a socio-political earthquake for the US, highly dependent on the dollar imperialist trend. For a conclusion, I highlight the need to avoid an idealist understanding of the paradoxical relations of a Chinese state as a political actor and capitalist economic processes that it tries to shape and instrumentalize. The Chinese contender state, dominated until now by capitalist relation of production, has a built-in contradiction in terms of opposing classes' political interest. The fulfillment of socio-political priorities held by the dominant party state group involves a daily struggle against profit-driven social forces, which are incubated objectively by capitalist relation of production, which remain present. The outcome of this struggle is not pre-guaranteed. However, the crisis 2008 was a political turning point when the social forces deeply connected to global capitalism were weakened by the crisis of new capitalism. Just recall the spectacular halving of trade surplus between 2008 and 2018. It means that the export as a pillar of economic growth was objectively weakened by the crisis of new liberal order, and the social forces that benefit from it also have been weakened. And furthermore, US geo-economic and geopolitical pressure on China means that social forces behind the contender state project are in relatively better political position nationally. Thank you, and apologizes for taking much time.
Thank you.
Okay, at the title you see that I use the term political economy and political ecology. You may ask, what is this political ecology? I only would like to say that it would be fine to have a common concept of political economy and ecology, but it doesn't exist, to be honest. So therefore this slash. I have some further preliminary remarks. The big question behind this question is, what is the future of mankind? Can mankind tackle the climate crisis? Will there be a survival anyway? Anyway, China plays a central role in this question, and also together with the bigger concept of the Belt and Road Initiative. My presentation is a long presentation, but we are limited, so I will skip many slides now, but you can look at the slides online maybe. And the last preliminary remark is that if you want a definite answer here, you will be disappointed. And I only will propose some highlights and background to give answers to this question. So I'm from the University of Vienna and do work on to this topic since many years. So I think it would be very, I think you cannot tackle Chinese issue if you don't know Chinese history, but I will not do, will not go in details about this. Maybe it's important to state that the Chinese economy is still bigger than the US economy since some years. If you use PPP comparisons. So my basic start is that I see, as we discussed it yesterday, somehow China is a development state which has some characteristics which are known, and there is China is in a long phase of transition, and you know there is a well-known phrase of socialism with Chinese characteristics. It is not always clear what are these characteristics really. Anyway, we discussed all these things yesterday. I will not repeat them. But anyway, maybe the most important thing, and it is maybe trivial, but is the existence of a big party of 90 million party members, which is the difference to other transitional states maybe. But there are many contradictions, as we have discussed also yesterday, and one contradiction is that the representation of workers, also from women in leading party structures, is not very developed, so to say. And we have some different development. So 15 years ago, we discussed this old question: will China stay socialist, capitalist, and so this old question. But since Xi Jinping, there is on the one hand a clear policy towards more stressing the inequality and yes, this state-owned, the performance of the state-owned companies and so on. But on the other hand, you have also a more increasing censorship anyway, and the discussion is still here, but it's not so intensively than in 15 years ago for my taste. But what is not seen in Europe, for example, that China still has a very vivid civil society, so to say, especially in ecological terms, where it is, I think, very strong. So, yeah, China's characteristics of industrial development. I would still add that yeah, our development was at colonial terms since 150 years at neo-colonial terms, but China's industrialization is not at colonial terms, but they have the world market, and prices are much higher. And okay, but this is only preliminary, and I would skip now this economic policy, which has some ecological consequences anyway. But so my story is the ecology, and I only want to add the story that of economies of scale and economies of scope, and but if you use economies of scale, for example, you have this big production numbers, but this also had the consequence of emissions, for example. So this is also combined with ecological consequences. And from an so I'm also a geographer, economist and geographer. So you have to remember some basics of China. So you know that China is the territory is similar to the US, but it has more than 5 times higher population. And it's similar with the same thing is with Europe. You have the size of Germany. But what does this mean for ecology? So if you have 4 times more emissions within the similar territory, you have. This is very important for ecology because the ecological developments usually don't have a linear development, but an exponential development. And so 4 times more is, in ecological terms, 20 times more or so in this sense. So a very basic proposal of mine is that if you look at the Chinese development since some decades, you can say that it is a time compressed development with very high growth rates, but it also a space compressed development because of this dense population numbers in China. But this has very, very important consequences again to ecology. So here I have a part on that the development of China is a restoration of China's global position, but I will skip this. But I give you a picture. Here you see the famous Bund at the Huangpo in Shanghai, which is the symbol of colonial times in China. They were the famous trade companies, and on the other side you have this is an older picture. Yeah, the skyline, this new skyline, and this is not. This is very symbolic. On the one side of the river, you have the old power. On the other side, 10 times higher, you have these skyscrapers. So, but you know, in ecological terms, if you look down from this tower, you see the smog, and you know. Beijing smog is better than in former times, but you have enormous problems in China, water, air, health, and so on because of the coal. But I will not especially discuss these things. Another thing is the mineral, the coal specifically because the coal is very, you know, the addiction to coal in China is like in Poland and Europe or so, but it's a very big country. So this coal addiction is a very severe thing. It is you have also, this is a combination yeah, with the Silk Road. You can speak of external extractivism, but this would be another thing. You see, if you know China, you will know this. The population in China is in the east 90%, and here these regions are not so populated. But what does this mean? This means that you have also a concentration of all these ecological emissions in this in the eastern regions. So I will skip the reasons about Belt and Road generally. Of course, resources and capacity utilization is an important thing, but it is much stronger, as it was mentioned, is much more comprehensive. And now I come to the Belt and Road more specifically. You have many problems in these Central Asian regions, for example. Different problems, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and so on. But you have also, yeah, I want to mention that the New Silk Road was originally an US term, which is not known so much, but it was forgotten later. But what I want to say, this Central Asia region is from an ecological view, is a very sensible region. You have droughts, the events of climate change are still stronger because it's within the continent, so the temperature is double as on the coasts, and you have some developments like around the Aral Sea, and the Aral Sea is almost history, as you probably know. Okay. And for example, you have big problems also in Russia or in Pakistan just now. So this is a region which is not only politically and economically a very specific region, but also in ecological terms. And these ecological problems are still the background for this political tensions. As for example, the thing in Syria was probably caused by droughts and the aftermath of it. But on the other hand, you have a very interesting performance in energy policy. As you know, China is world on world top with PV, solar energy, wind energy. 50% of all new installations are there. So and they also within the Belt and Road Initiative, they do a lot in these things, but it is still at the beginning, because this coal, you have China reduced the share of coal in energy utilization from about 80 to 60% already, but it's still very high, and it is a very difficult thing to come to climate neutrality. But because the problems in China with ecology are so strong in water, air, and so on, there is also a counter tendency, and I think that the Chinese, especially also the leaders, do know how severe these problems are for the existence of the Chinese civilization. Because if you don't have clean water, the clean water is only 100 meters below ground. If you have no healthy air for the kids, it's a very severe thing. Also, in agriculture, the soil is there are really hard problems, but then there is a counter policy, as you know, and there is a strong concept also, which is unique globally. This is the concept of ecological civilization, which is also a very broad concept. It's not only ecological, so to say, but also cultural and yes, urbanization in this context is a very interesting thing. But I want to give some highlight to a literature which is not known very much, from Wen Yang and Philip Lawn, which is an Australian, and they have interesting calculations that I think it is not totally right, but from the trend, it's important. So here you see the development of the GDP, and if you use another calculation of wealth, the so-called general progress indicator, this is GDP minus ecological harm, so to say, then the Chinese growth rates would be much, much lower. So, but anyway, this is somehow deliberate how to calculate this, but here maybe the truth is within this reach. So, but I think the Chinese have they don't know what does this mean for China, and yeah, there are some here I have some socio-ecological basics of China. As you know, for example, that they have only a smaller part of arable land, water resources, and so on, and therefore the things of climate harms are still stronger in China, because if you only have a smaller part for arable land, all these things, also desertification and so on, are still performing harder. And I want to explain shortly concept which is not known so much, but this is I think interestingly you can see it in a more historical term. So Europe made colonial policies, as we know, but in China there was the so-called inward colonization, and this means labor-intensive agriculture. And you see these. Yes, it's a very Chinese agriculture is a very many labor-intensive agriculture anyway. So this is this. You have, maybe you know Mark Alvin, which had the concept of the high equilibrium trap, and this is one maybe one source that China didn't realize this industrial takeoff former to Europe, because they had a very they were in an equilibrium, so to say. But okay, this would be another thing. As I mentioned, the soil is a very and therefore agriculture is a very sensible question in China. And you know, we have a big loss of soil by urbanization and so on. And the most bad thing is the qualitative degradation by chemicals and emissions, which is very strong and which you cannot you can change the air policy from very quick, but these chemicals are within the soil, and this is a thing. Okay, so yeah, the height. Yeah, I have some empirical evaluations of these policies of Belt and Road in ecological terms, but to be honest, it is an open question what will happen, and there is a different performance of all these things. And I will end my presentation with a very positive decision in China 1 year ago. And for example, and I think it is very clear what the direction what the direction will be. So they stopped the exporting of coal-fired power plants. So they internally still will continue the implementation of coal power plants, but anyway, they stopped building these coal power plants, which are a very central thing in ecological terms. So this is my positive end, and thank you very much.
Thank you for all the presentations. They have broadened our horizon about China's development. And so, yeah, please go ahead. If you don't mind, if you can come to here so that our online attendees can hear you as well. Thank you.
Actually, my question is not so much specifically for this panel, but more broadly about all the panels that took place even yesterday. because it is raising some questions which I think are relevant to the previous presentations, and especially what Sam Q you were saying yesterday about the system in China and how it is transitional. And so I missed a couple of the presentations yesterday, so I'm not sure if this is the overall let's say the overall premise that a lot of the speakers have, with the exception of Sam Ki. But it seems to me that there is this contrast and discrepancy between how, on the one hand, official Chinese policy presents itself internally and in official documents and in their self-perception, and also in the perception that we see as witnessed and presented to us by people within China. Yesterday there were testimonials about various socialist projects that go on. And we have, on the one hand, this self-perception of socialism with Chinese characteristics, a system which is a contradiction between, and also an assemblage of socialism and capitalism on the other hand. And this is their self-perception and also the projection. But on the other hand, we seem to, by and large, in the West, we seem to still take as a starting point this almost colonialist still projection of China as a capitalist system. So we absurdly from the region of the world where identity politics is the most prominent and most dominant, we don't acknowledge the identity and self-identity of Chinese system and the Chinese people as those living in a system which, yes, it has its contradictions, but it is not socialism, it's not capitalism, it's transitional. And yet we in discussions we may acknowledge it, but still when we present research, especially on the Belt and Road Initiative, we seem to start as a starting point as China as a variety of capitalism, or as China as some sort of spatial fix which fits within our own notions of what we perceive China to be. So what my question is, again, starting to Sam Ki's presentation yesterday, if we go back to understanding the relationship between the domestic system and its international projection, and acknowledge that China, or start acknowledging that China is some sort of socialism with China's characteristics, or at least some transitional system between socialism and capitalism, then instead of describing and focusing only on this capitalist primitive accumulation, we considered the role of socialist primitive accumulation. What conclusions will then this lead us to in terms of Chinese international relations and BRI? So if let's say the corresponding system to neoliberalism internationally is liberal internationalism, what would be the corresponding system internationally of socialism with Chinese characteristics based on some aspects of primitive socialist accumulation? And what perspectives will this bring for us, instead of just viewing China as this other capitalist system, and then perceiving the Belt and Road Initiative within our own projection of an extension of the spatial fix, which is only, again, a replication of our own systems in the West, and it's not a reflection of how the Chinese system works and how it wants to be seen. So, and I would additionally be interested in hearing if you have some suggestions on readings on this, and researchers that are working from this angle. I would be very interested in reading about it. Thank you.
Excellent question. Yes.
No, just we got a lot of literature reference we can provide to you on this topic. I mean, one place to start. That's key.
question is my name is Elias. I'm a professor at Rio de Janeiro State University. My question is very simple question. What's for all speakers, what's the potential of anti-imperialist Belt and Road Initiative in the world now? For example, China produced, according to Javier Vadel, a globalization with production inclusion, productive globalization inclusive. Yeah, what's the anti-imperialist of this with this movement by China with the Belt and Road Initiative? This is one question. I don't know if you understand. Another question: the deal between Iran and China. In my point of view, I want to know the opinion of my friend from Palestine. It's correct. We developed a point that this deal between Iran and China. Iran provide China with oil during 25 years, and China provide a lot of lines of high velocity railways in Iran, and they will build a subway of Tehran and transfer the technology of the subway and the high velocity railway. It's correct China with this deal between China and Iran inaugurates a new paradigm between center-peripheral relations. This is the point, and the last point. I should, my point of view, in a Brazilian point of view. I'm not European. I'm a Brazilian, Latin America. I observe the thing with the older eyes. That is not socialist or capitalist make commerce or make trade. This is in my point of view. This is a moralistic and not materialistic starting point to analyze these relations. For example, Lenin in the last, I don't know if some remember or Sanki, Lenin in the last speaks and the last papers, Lenin quotation to importance of trade between countries and between capitalism and socialism, because Lenin thinks we are the world want to destroy us. On the way that socialism and capitalism should to a great battle between capitalism and socialism in Lenin point of view is the commerce in this international trade. Or say Lenin tries to move the battle from military field to commercial field. I want to know what you think about that, about the role of socialism in international trade system, international financial system, because it's very possible socialism is a big panther, not rage, not relations between countries, not build projects in other countries. Socialism, China is a extractivist power. I think it's a moralistic question. It's not a materialist question. Socialism, in my point of view, should to make a battle for champs or commercial champs in the world against capitalism. Thank you for much.
Anyone else, yes, please.
Hello, Gianluca from the University of the Basque Country. 3 points. One of style for the presentations, which have been very nice. Maybe the slides, they should have less text, so that maybe we can listen to you and not get lost with the presentation. Some of them, they have a lot, and it was impossible maybe to pay attention and to the PowerPoint. So maybe just as a style. One quick note to your question, general question. You are presuming that China is socialist. I would maybe ask you, what do you think as socialism? And there are also some texts on state capitalism. Maybe China is actually capitalist in its entire structure, but maybe has developed new forms of capitalism. And maybe it has inherently the same contradictions of capitalism, and it's not something in the middle, it's just capitalism in a new way, rather than socialists, you know, not to have this kind of dichotomy. And for the first presenters, one question on culture. You have used culture as a critical concept. I'm not so acquainted with your literature, but I would ask you, you haven't presented the notion of culture, what it is. You presume culture. And in that sense, it is not that clear why culture creates the infrastructure, or why you said that the culture goes first before going and making the factories or the bridges or the ports. So in what sense culture, it's necessary for that to happen? And if there was no culture, then how would it be? You know, why it's so important, culture as a concept?
Thank you. Anyone else? I think I will just quickly respond to the first question. I think that was an excellent question. Thank you for raising it, but it may be too broad to be answered here. But if I may say just quickly, because you ask about how does this, if primitive socialist accumulation happens in China, what is the difference when it applies to when China, for example, investing abroad? So if we look at how China invests abroad, the investment is actually not just captured in the foreign direct investment. What I have studied is that they do a lot of contracted work. So contracted projects. One way is providing funding to the government. The government, local government presented some development plans they want to just get funding for. They couldn't get it from other banks. Chinese banks agreed, then they would provide the funding, and then they also have contractors that are able to deliver these projects. So that is one way, that's how we see how these cumulative primitive socialist accumulation is used for productive use, not only in China alone. So I think this has happened in quite a lot of places. I think we have quite a lot of examples yesterday in other presentations. So people may see that as just a kind of capitalist investment, but if no one else is willing to do that, take the risk, or don't think it's economical, China is willing to do. No matter what you say, it is actually maybe another logic that they are applying to. So they are able to use these funds to use on these so-called uneconomic but useful social projects. The other thing I wanted to say is maybe questions for others is the first one is the culture for the first presentation. Because the soft power and the culture kind of influence from China, you can see there's a lot of resistance as well. For example, the closing down of the Confucius Institute in the US and the UK, and a lot of criticisms on China, even though China is just starting to maybe try to promote itself, but it received a lot of resistance and hostility. So to what extent do you think China can kind of deliver its project? Maybe increasingly, it's not just up to China, it's actually how the other side is reacting to this. So have you analyzed this side, and are they having any strategy to deal with that? The second question is for Salam. Yes, thank you for letting us look at the Middle Eastern area, because it has always been kind of people see as a resource curse region. They resource curse because it's relying on the export of oil, of the primary resources, then industrialization is actually very far behind. So, and then this leads to the argument that trading, focusing on exports of oil and gas, for example, will just lead to primarization of these regions. So is China doing anything different in these regions in comparison to the traditional traders, Western traders in the Middle East? The last question is for Josef. Your conclusion is that Xi Jinping did have a dream of ecological civilization for China, and they actually have some plan or some saying on this. Do you think this is just a rhetoric, or do you have any data or empirical study so far that can support that they are not just empty talks, they're actually doing something, and this may be possible? Just want to see your view on this. Thank you. So if no one else asking question, I will let the presenters come to respond then. Maybe in the same sequence as how you present.
Well, starting from the last one, we started the presentation by stating that we take the Belt and Road Initiative as the platform of our analysis. So we didn't took a look of how Confucius Institute engage outside the Eurasian landmass, but of course it will be an important aspect to analyze, even if, especially if we consider as solid the idea of China cultural influence along the BRI that has global ambition. So how this culture that creates itself along the BRI can be exported outside the Eurasian landmass. These are impacts we cannot predict now, but of course it will be a point of analysis of research for future development and future impact on IP dynamics. Culture, so we explicitly refer to cultural elements in soft power strategy. So when we mentioned culture, it was to mention cultural elements in the soft power strategies and cultural diplomacy that influence IP dynamics. We didn't took culture as a whole because, as Martina would say, there are more than 300 definitions of culture, depending on the cultural context. The point of analysis is how historical narrative of the Silk Road as cultural elements that China is leveraging on to achieve economic and strategic objectives. So how the cultural elements related to the heritage of the Silk Road are used by China to engage with others and to achieve, again, foreign policy and trade objectives. This is how we conceive culture, not culture as cultural elements.
So are you studying situations in which it was effective, the use of this soft power, and places in which was not used? Because I guess it requires resources, no? To build up museums and stuff you talked about.
Yes.
The UNESCO, whatever legitimacy.
Yeah.
I guess they have to deploy diplomats or people to write these documents and negotiate.
Yeah.
Do you make a comparison study between when it was implemented or not, or if it was effective or not? Or maybe they just sometimes do it. They do it for all the...
No, we analyzed some cases along the BRI. For example, we analyzed the case of the maritime Silk Road narrative, especially based on the historical figures of Zhang He, which is a famous one. And we found out that China funds for archaeology, sorry, missions for the shipwrecks, founding these shipwrecks of Zhang He. So they put them and found some museums in the ports, city ports in Africa. So they recreate its narrative along the BRI. So
it's like China is encouraging other states, at least in the Asian continent, to revive the historical narrative of historical figures that contributed to the encounter of people. And as the map we showed in the presentation, they are not directly linked, but you can assume that somehow the commitment to revitalize an historical narrative precisely coincide with the willingness of China to invest in that exactly geographical area. That's
Yeah, and we mentioned the case of UNESCO because it's particular. So the UN agency stated that state parties need to cooperate in the nomination of World Heritage Sites. So this means that China needs to cooperate with other countries, and it's doing this through transnational cooperation with states and nominating some traditional properties along the BRI. So we know that there's one site described of the World Heritage List, which is the Tanan-Tianshan corridor. But we know that there are more than this. And China is working on some nominations on the Maritime Silk Road. So it's something, ongoing. And that's why we said that the impact is unpredictable right now. But
another element by talking, it comes to my mind is the Sinocentric view of the initiative. There is a lot of arguments around how the initiative is mentioned as a Chinese initiative, and this somehow reflects how the soft power of China is having a lot of impact in terms of the public acceptance of the projects. But there is in comparison, a lot of literature, for example, in Japan, states that the Silk Road, it doesn't end in China, but in Japan, or otherwise when India, when presenting to the public audience the joint agreement between China and India on the Belt Road, the Indian president stated that it is a joint initiative, while China is not mentioning, is mentioning the heritage around the Silk Road. So soft power is really hard to grasp. You have to, in the case we wanted to address, it was really hard to find soft power in IIPPE scholarship, and we had to look at the cultural heritage in order to grasp how it works and how it's going to be deployed. I'll we give you some arguments for the question. Thank you for raising the question.
Thank you for the question. With respect to first question about the debate on China and the interest of debating the nature of development going on in China, it's really interesting as a question, because the real question is how to frame China and why it is important, the debate about the framing general trend in China. The problem is that the problem, it's normal, it's like that. Social sciences are ideologically biased, you see, and they are a domain of conflict between competing social interests. The problem is that framing China in the West is made by corporate media, and especially by corporate media, which is connected to specific class interests, finance capital in the West, which is dominating political economy of the West, in addition to academia in the West, with all ideological limits that we have in the academia. Why it is important? It is important, before speaking why it is important, what I mean that it's formulated by the corporate media, that the term of debate, the general frame of debate are defined by this social interest. Even my work is a defensive one, you see, trying to advance another reflection. When I try to find analytical concepts that suit new elements in China, it's difficult because we are applying concepts used to study United States on China, Europe on China. There is new elements on China which need new conceptualization. This effort is poorly made in Western academia. Why it is important to frame general trend in Chinese development? First, because simply it's 20% of population of the world. It is 30, almost 30% of industrial production. It's first economy in terms of purchasing power parity. And it means that it's important to understand how the balance of power at the international level is evolving. What different political economic projects have different political power. This have a direct political implication. In a country-specific country, you need to make a development project. Let's speak about Egypt, for example. International context is determinant for what you can do, what you can't do. So understanding what China is doing, is it offering you opportunities or no, is fundamental. Second, what are the implications? If we take several questions spoke about implication in concrete terms for Chinese rise, for developing countries, for socialism, etc. Main implication is that the internationalization of the Chinese hybrid model of status development is limiting, is working as a countervailing forces against new liberal project. Simply put, if you are a trade partner with China, if you have a trade agreement with China, we don't impose on you to adopt intellectual property rules that impede the development of your industrial technological base. You can exchange with China, and China, because it doesn't have any interest with restrictive intellectual property rights, you see, because it is industrializing, it needs technology from outside, it doesn't need restrictive rules. So it has a direct positive implication on other countries in the sense that it permits other countries, the rise of China constitute a turning point in the international political economy in the sense that it permits to put in place status developmentalist strategies that seek to structural transformation. Now, in respect to China's relation with Middle East and the primarization and the commodity course, it's an interesting question. When I say that Chinese emergence is a turning point, it doesn't mean that it's automatic, because it is the responsibilities of other population, for example, in the Middle East, to adopt the appropriate development project and to negotiate with good with China, very good with China, because it's not automatic. You see, Chinese have a lot of trouble, have 20% of population. Imagine managing 1.4 person. It's not a simple number. So they are not in like Soviet Union or before, they are not exporting directly and offensively a model. There is an externality for their defensive approach, defensive at the national level, which is changing international atmosphere. And my thesis of war that China, to persist as a national unity, it should change the world, simply, because all resources become from outside. Thank you.
Yeah, first, of course, the ecological civilization is against capital logic. So you could put this in terms of eco-socialism or so. But and I think it's more than rhetoric. But the thing is, the ecological problems in China are so strong that if you have a good performance, you have 50% of all PV installation and so on and so on. It doesn't change very much. So it is, so to say, as if you swim against the stream, you will not proceed if you have a strong stream against you, because the problems are so high. I think that there is a implementation of a green, so to say, green Belt and Road Initiative, but there are the problems with the contradiction with the capital logic anyway. But it's not only rhetoric. It's very they have a good, basically a good implementation. And last, the general problem is what Patrick Bond yesterday said. With the ecological debt of the West. So there is the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities. but this concept is not really installed in global policy. But I think if the West would accept this ecological debt and give technology transfer and so on, I think Chinese would accelerate this ecological policy.
Thank you so much for responding to all the questions. And I think we need to end this session now. We are starting in 5 minutes. So I'm sorry, I'm so poor in time management, but I hope you enjoyed the session today. We'll see you very soon. Okay, thank you.